Northern Plains, late December 1872. While neighboring Lakota families quickly erected standard buffalo hide teepees before the brutal winter, 37-year-old Red Elk was still gathering materials in his third week of preparation, building a shelter with inner walls that consumed 6 additional hides. His fellow hunters called it wasteful. The tribal elders shook their heads. Why use extra hides when standard tepees had worked for generations? Then the unprecedented polar plunge of January 1873 arrived. Temperatures dropped to 32 below zero with 65-mile-per-hour winds. The deepest cold in living memory that would test every shelter method across the northern plains. Standard tepees recorded interior temperatures of 20 below zero. Families huddled around fires that consumed 3 logs per hour just to survive. But Red Elk's double-wall tepee maintained 14 degrees above zero inside, using only 2 logs per hour, while sheltering 10 people through the worst nights without a single case of frostbite. What did this Lakota scout understand about trapping air and blocking wind that accepted tribal wisdom had missed? Red Elk crouched beside the Little Missouri River on the morning of December 28, 1872, examining the buffalo hides spread across the frozen ground. At 37 years old, he had survived enough brutal winters to recognize the subtle signs that others missed. The way frost formed thicker on certain hide surfaces, how wind currents carved patterns in the snow around standard tipi bases, where heat escaped most rapidly through conventional shelter walls. His wife Morning Star worked beside him, her experienced hands running sinew thread through punctured holes as they prepared the outer covering that would require 14 hides instead of the usual 10 to 12. The camp bustled around them with typical pre-winter preparations. Gray Wolf directed his family in raising their conventional shelter, stretching 12 buffalo hides around 15 lodge poles that stood 15 feet tall, following the pattern that had served the Lakota for countless generations. Blue Bear supervised the construction of 3 more standard tepees nearby, each following identical specifications with skirts that would rest directly on the snow surface and smoke flaps positioned according to tribal wisdom, passed down through decades of successful winters. Morning Star paused in her stitching to watch Red Elk measure distances with a rawhide cord marked in hand widths. He had spent the previous evening explaining his modifications to their 2 children, 8-year-old Swift Fox and 5-year-old Little Hawk, describing how he would suspend additional hides inside their shelter to create what he called a dead air space. The children listened with the serious attention of young people who understood that winter survival depended on every detail being executed perfectly. The materials Red Elk had gathered represented weeks of additional preparation beyond what other families considered necessary. 6 extra buffalo hides lay ready for the inner lining, each one carefully selected for thickness and treated with the fur side facing inward to maximize warmth retention. 8 spruce logs, each 2 feet long and 6 inches in diameter, waited to serve as anchoring pins for the skirt system he planned to modify. 60 lodgepole pine saplings stood bundled nearby, harvested during 2 full days of gathering with the help of his brother-in-law Stone Bear and nephew Gray Horse. As Red Elk began positioning the outer covering, voices carried across the camp expressing familiar skepticism. Gray Wolf called out from his nearly completed shelter, questioning the wisdom of using additional materials when proven methods had always sufficed. Blue Bear shook his head while observing the extra hides, muttering about unnecessary waste when winter demanded careful resource management. The camp's senior women, including Gray Wolf's wife Singing Bird and Blue Bear's sister Bright Moon, exchanged knowing looks that suggested they viewed Red Elk's preparations as the anxious over-preparation of someone who had forgotten to trust in traditional knowledge. The inner lining system required precise spacing and careful attachment points along the lodge poles. Red Elk worked methodically, measuring 8 inches from the outer wall before marking where each section of the interior covering would hang. He used rawhide lacing to secure the liner at multiple points, ensuring the dead air cavity would remain consistent around the entire circumference of the shelter. Morning Star assisted by holding sections in place while he made final adjustments, her movements showing the confidence of someone who had decided to trust her husband's unconventional approach despite community pressure. The skirt modification demanded even more departure from accepted practice. Where standard construction allowed the bottom edge of the tipi covering to rest on the snow surface, Red Elk pressed his skirt 4 inches deeper into the packed snow, creating a seal that would prevent wind infiltration. He positioned the 8 spruce logs as anchoring pins, burying each one partially, and using them to hold the extended skirt firmly against wind-up lift that could destroy the barrier he was creating. By mid-afternoon, Red Elk and 3 helpers began constructing the brush windbreak that had drawn the most criticism from other camp members. The circular fence required careful placement of the 60 saplings, each one positioned to create a barrier 6 feet high, extending in a 12-foot radius around the eastern approach to the teepee. Stone Bear and Gray Horse worked alongside Red Elk's neighbor White Hawk, who had volunteered despite his own doubts about the project's necessity. They anchored each sapling 10 inches deep in the frozen ground, weaving smaller branches between the uprights to create a solid barrier against the northwest winds that typically dominated winter storms in their region. The construction progressed steadily despite the skeptical comments that continued throughout the day. When White Bear, the band's 58-year-old chief, stopped to observe the windbreak construction, his expression remained neutral, but his question suggested concern about the labor investment. Other families had completed their standard tipis in less than 3 hours each, while Red Elk's modifications had required a full day of work plus extensive advance preparation. As evening approached and the modified shelter neared completion, Red Elk stood back to examine his work alongside Morning Star and their children. The double wall system created a visibly different profile from the neighboring tipis, with the inner lining creating subtle shadows and the extended skirt system forming a broader base. The brush windbreak stood as a testament to either careful preparation or wasteful anxiety, depending on the observer's perspective. The central fire pit, positioned 5 feet from the door opening and slightly off-center toward the east, awaited the first test of Red Elk's thermal management theories. Lodge poles angled 15 degrees outward would theoretically reduce the chimney effect that could draw heat upward too rapidly, while the adjusted smoke flaps promised to maintain proper ventilation without creating excessive updraft that would pull cold air in through the base. Clear skies promised overnight temperatures near 15 below zero, providing the first opportunity to measure whether Red Elk's innovations would justify the additional resources and labor they had consumed. The polar air mass descended on January 2, 1873, bringing conditions that veteran hunters recognized as exceptional even by northern plains standards. Daytime temperatures struggled to reach zero, while nighttime readings plummeted to 32 below, accompanied by northwest winds that sustained 45-mile-per-hour gusts across the exposed prairie. The storm system stretched from the Canadian territories down through the Dakota region, creating a frozen zone that would test every survival strategy the Lakota bands had developed over generations. Gray Wolf's family felt the cold penetrate their standard teepee within the first hours of the storm's arrival. His wife Singing Bird monitored their fire pit carefully, feeding logs at regular intervals as the interior temperature dropped steadily from the marginal warmth they had maintained during milder weather. By 10 o'clock that evening, a simple thermometer borrowed from a visiting trader registered 5 below zero inside their shelter, despite the continuous burning of seasoned wood that should have provided adequate heat under normal winter conditions. The contrast became evident as midnight approached, and the storm reached its initial peak intensity. Gray Wolf's teepee interior had fallen to 18 below zero, forcing the family to huddle directly around their fire pit while wrapped in multiple buffalo robes. Their fuel consumption accelerated dramatically as they burned 3 16-inch logs every 45 minutes, creating a cycle of constant wood gathering that depleted their carefully hoarded winter supply at an unsustainable rate. Meanwhile, Red Elk monitored conditions inside his modified shelter with methodical precision, recording readings that validated his unconventional approach. At 10 o'clock, his interior temperature held steady at 14 above zero, 32 degrees warmer than Gray Wolf's measurement taken simultaneously. The dead air cavity between his outer and inner walls maintained its insulating properties as warm air trapped in the 8-inch space reduced heat transfer to the exterior surface. Morningstar observed frost patterns that revealed the effectiveness of their modifications. While neighboring teepees developed thick ice formations on their interior walls, some accumulating frost 8 millimeters deep, Red Elk's inner lining remained relatively clear with only minimal ice buildup. The suspended buffalo hides caught moisture from their breathing and cooking before it could reach the outer wall, preventing the formation of the thick frost barriers that reduced radiant heat in conventional shelters. By midnight, Red Elk's interior had dropped only to 10 above zero while maintaining fuel consumption of just 2 logs per hour. His brush windbreak demonstrated its value as gusts reaching 45 miles per hour struck the eastern barrier and diverted around the teepee rather than attacking the vulnerable skirt area where cold infiltration typically occurred. The saplings swayed under the wind pressure, but held their positions, creating a calm zone that protected the anchored skirt system from the uplift forces that compromised standard constructions. The technical advantages became measurable as the night progressed. Red Elk's fire pit, positioned to optimize heat distribution within the double wall system, required 33% less fuel than comparable heating efforts in single-wall tipis. The inner lining directed heated air in circulation patterns that maximize contact with living spaces, while the outer wall bore the brunt of convective heat loss to the sub-zero exterior environment. January 4th brought the storm's second wave with even more severe conditions. Overnight temperatures reached 38 below zero, creating survival challenges that pushed conventional shelter systems beyond their design limits. Gray Wolf's family struggled to maintain any interior warmth above the critical threshold, recording interior temperatures of 5 below zero despite burning 4 logs per hour in a desperate attempt to generate sufficient heat. The crisis deepened when Gray Wolf's 8-year-old son, Stone Hawk, developed early signs of cold injury on his fingertips, the pale skin and reduced sensation indicating that even their best efforts to maintain warmth were proving inadequate. Singing Bird wrapped the child's hands in warm buffalo fur, while Gray Wolf considered the possibility that their traditional shelter might not withstand the unprecedented conditions they faced. 4 other families in the camp experienced similar struggles as the extended cold overwhelmed their standard tipi heating systems. Whitehawk's family of 5 huddled together for shared body warmth, while their interior temperature dropped to levels that threatened hypothermia in the most vulnerable members. Blue Bear's tipi developed structural problems as repeated freeze-thaw cycles from inadequate heating caused the hide covering to contract and loosen at critical attachment points. Red Elk's shelter continued to outperform expectations throughout the crisis period. His interior temperature remained at 6 above zero during the worst night, providing a survival margin that kept his family comfortable while their neighbors fought to prevent cold injury. The inner lining system trapped body heat from 5 occupants and enhanced the radiant heating effect of their fire pit, creating thermal conditions that felt almost warm compared to the brutal environment outside. The fuel efficiency advantage became crucial as wood supplies throughout the camp dwindled under the increased consumption demands. While standard tipis burned through winter reserves at unsustainable rates, Red Elk's 2 log per hour consumption allowed his family to maintain heat without depleting their carefully gathered wood stores. His windbreak system prevented the wind chill effects that forced other families to compensate with higher interior temperatures, reducing the overall energy requirement for maintaining livable conditions. Morningstar noted that frost accumulation on their inner walls remained minimal even during the worst conditions, never exceeding 3 millimeters of thickness compared to the heavy ice formations that plagued conventional teepees. The suspended lining caught moisture and prevented the thermal barriers that reduced heating efficiency in single-wall constructions, maintaining the insulating properties that kept their shelter functional when others began to fail. The relentless cold system that settled over the northern plains on January 7, 1873, brought sustained conditions that exceeded anything in tribal memory. For 6 consecutive days, daytime temperatures never rose above 5 below zero, while nighttime readings plunged to 40 degrees below, accompanied by winds that maintained 50 to 60 mile-per-hour velocities across the exposed prairie. The storm system created a survival crisis that would separate functional shelter designs from those that merely appeared adequate under normal winter conditions. White Hawk's family of 5 faced the collapse of their conventional survival strategy during the 3rd night of the extended freeze. His 16-year-old son Running Wolf began exhibiting the unmistakable signs of hypothermia as their tipi interior dropped to 25 below zero despite continuous fire maintenance. The young man's responses slowed noticeably. His shivering became intermittent rather than constant, and his skin took on the pale coloration that experienced hunters recognized as the body's surrender to overwhelming cold. White Hawk made the difficult decision to abandon their shelter at 2 o'clock in the morning, gathering his family's essential belongings for relocation to any available warm space in the camp. Gray Wolf's teepee became an emergency refuge as multiple families discovered that their traditional constructions could not maintain livable conditions. His own family's struggle continued with interior temperatures that fluctuated between 15 and 25 below zero, forcing them to burn wood at rates that would exhaust their winter supply within days rather than months. Singing Bird and their 2 children pressed close to the fire pit in shifts, rotating positions to prevent frostbite while maintaining the fuel supply that represented their only barrier against the killing cold outside. The structural failures extended beyond simple heating inadequacy as the sustained winds attacked vulnerable points in conventional tipi designs. Blue Bear's shelter developed critical problems when repeated gusts lifted the skirt edges, allowing streams of sub-zero air to flow along the ground and undermine the heated zone around his fire pit. The infiltration created convective currents that drew warm air upward through the smoke hole faster than his fire could replace it, establishing a cycle of heat loss that made his fuel consumption meaningless. Stonehawk's family abandoned their teepee entirely when the hide covering developed stress fractures from repeated freeze-thaw cycles, creating gaps that admitted wind-driven snow and eliminated any possibility of maintaining interior warmth. They relocated to Gray Wolf's already crowded shelter, adding 5 more people to a space designed for optimal heating efficiency with a much smaller occupancy load. Red Elk's modifications demonstrated their value under the extreme conditions as his interior temperature stabilized at 4 above zero during the worst nights. The dead air cavity between his walls maintained its insulating properties, even when exterior surfaces reached temperatures that froze exposed skin within minutes. His fuel consumption remained steady at approximately 2 logs per hour, a rate that allowed sustainable heating throughout the extended crisis, without depleting his wood reserves. The brush windbreak proved its worth when 60-mile-per-hour gusts struck the barrier and dissipated their force before reaching the tipi's vulnerable base area. The saplings bent under the wind pressure but held their positions, creating a protected zone where the anchored skirt system remained sealed against infiltration. Other tipis in the camp suffered repeated skirt lifting that admitted cold air directly into their heated spaces, undermining their fire pit's effectiveness and creating the convective heat loss that made survival increasingly difficult. Morningstar monitored the performance of their inner lining system as condensation from breathing and cooking created moisture challenges throughout the camp. Their suspended buffalo hides captured water vapor before it could reach the outer wall and freeze into the thick ice barriers that plagued conventional shelters. The minimal frost accumulation on their inner surfaces allowed radiant heat from their fire pit to warm the living space efficiently rather than melting ice formations that absorbed thermal energy without contributing to comfort. On January 10th, Gray Wolf made his first direct request for assistance, arriving at Red Elk's tepee at dawn, after a night when his family's survival had depended on burning furniture and personal items to maintain minimal heat. His acknowledgement came without elaborate explanations or justifications, simply a recognition that his traditional methods were failing under conditions that Red Elk's innovations were handling successfully. The conversation remained brief and practical, focusing on immediate shelter needs rather than theoretical discussions about construction techniques. The accommodation of Gray Wolf's family in Red Elk's teepee created an opportunity to test the system's capacity under increased occupancy loads. 10 people now shared the modified shelter, their combined body heat contributing approximately 4 degrees to the interior temperature, while their breathing and movement created additional moisture management challenges for the inner lining system. The doubled occupancy actually improved fuel efficiency as shared body warmth reduced the fire pit's workload to approximately 1 log per hour during the warmest periods. Red Elk's construction techniques revealed their sophisticated engineering under the sustained stress test. His lodge poles angled at 15 degrees outward created a structural framework that resisted wind pressure while maintaining the optimal interior volume for heat circulation. The smoke hole adjustments he had made allowed proper ventilation without creating the excessive updraft that pulled heated air from the living space, maintaining the thermal balance that kept interior temperatures viable. The technical success of the double wall system became measurable through direct comparison with struggling conventional tipies throughout the camp. The 8-inch dead air cavity reduced heat transfer to the exterior by approximately 20%, creating thermal efficiency that translated directly into lower fuel requirements and higher interior temperatures. The anchored skirt system prevented the wind infiltration that plagued standard constructions, eliminating the convective heat loss that made conventional fire pits inadequate under extreme conditions. As the crisis entered its second week, the distinction between functional and inadequate shelter designs had eliminated any remaining doubt about the effectiveness of Red Elk's approach to winter survival engineering. The Arctic air mass that descended on January 13th brought conditions that transformed the survival crisis into a systematic test of every shelter design in the camp. Nighttime temperatures reached 45 below zero, while sustained winds of 65 miles per hour created wind chill factors that could freeze exposed flesh within seconds. The meteorological assault lasted 6 consecutive nights, creating an endurance trial that would definitively separate functional winter engineering from inadequate traditional approaches. 4 families using conventional tipi construction reported complete heating system failures as their interior temperatures dropped below 20 below zero despite maximum fire pit utilization. Blue Bear's family experienced structural collapse when their skirt anchoring system failed under repeated wind assault, allowing the bottom edge of their hide covering to lift and flap violently in the gusts. The resulting cold air infiltration made their shelter uninhabitable within hours, forcing emergency relocation to already overcrowded backup accommodations. Stonehawk's 7-year-old daughter, Prairie Rose, developed frostbite on 3 toes during the night of January 15th, when their conventional tipi's heating capacity proved insufficient to maintain circulation in her extremities. The child's injury required immediate treatment with warm water immersion and buffalo fur wrapping, techniques that demanded heated water supplies their failing fire pit could barely provide. The medical emergency highlighted the life-threatening consequences of inadequate thermal engineering under extreme weather conditions. Swift Eagle, Gray Wolf's 12-year-old daughter, documented the mechanical failures affecting standard tipi designs throughout the camp. She observed that conventional skirt systems allowed measurable air infiltration when winds exceeded 50 miles per hour, creating convective currents that drew heated air upward through smoke holes faster than fire pits could replace thermal energy. Her detailed observations included noting that frost formations on interior walls had grown to 10 millimeters thick in some conventional shelters, creating thermal barriers that absorbed radiant heat without contributing to occupant warmth. The cumulative impact of shelter failures created a refugee crisis within the camp as multiple families abandoned their primary accommodations. Whitehawk's group joined Gray Wolf's family in Red Elk's modified tipi, bringing the total occupancy to 10 adults and children sharing space designed for optimal heating with a much smaller population. The increased density created new challenges for moisture management and air circulation while simultaneously providing additional body heat that reduced fire pit fuel requirements. Red Elk's construction demonstrated remarkable stability under the maximum stress conditions, maintaining interior temperatures of 2 above zero when exterior readings reached 45 below. His brush windbreak absorbed the full force of 65 mile-per-hour gusts without structural failure, with the lodge pole pine saplings bending significantly but returning to vertical positions as wind patterns shifted. The barrier's effectiveness became measurable through the protected zone it created, where effective wind speed at the tipi's base remained below 20 miles per hour, despite the extreme conditions surrounding the camp. The fuel efficiency advantages of Red Elk's system became crucial as wood supplies throughout the camp reached critical depletion levels, while conventional tipis burned through winter reserves at rates exceeding 4 logs per hour. Red Elk's shelter maintained livable conditions with approximately 1 log per hour due to the combined effects of improved insulation, reduced infiltration, and shared body heat from increased occupancy. His windbreak eliminated the wind chill effects that forced other families to compensate with unsustainable heating levels. Morningstar managed the expanded household with systematic efficiency, organizing sleeping arrangements and cooking schedules that optimized heat distribution among 10 occupants. Her experience with the inner lining system proved invaluable, as increased respiration and cooking created elevated moisture loads that conventional tipis could not handle. The suspended buffalo hides continued capturing water vapor before it could freeze on exterior surfaces, maintaining the thermal properties that made their shelter functional under extreme conditions. White Bear, the band's chief, conducted a systematic assessment of shelter performance throughout the camp during the crisis peak on January 16th. His survey documented that 8 families using conventional methods had experienced frost injuries, structural failures, or complete heating system collapse, while the 4 families utilizing Red Elk's modifications reported no injuries and maintained sustainable heating throughout the emergency period. The quantifiable results eliminated any remaining doubt about the superiority of the double wall approach under extreme winter conditions. The technical measurements accumulated during the crisis provided concrete evidence of engineering effectiveness. Red Elk's dead air cavity system reduced heat transfer by approximately 22% compared to single-wall constructions, while his anchored skirt design eliminated infiltration volumes that reached 8 cubic meters per hour in conventional tipis. The brush windbreak reduced effective wind speeds from 65 miles per hour to approximately 20 miles per hour at ground level, preventing the convective heat loss that made standard fire pits inadequate. Running Bear, the visiting Blackfeet elder who had originally shared the inner lining concept with Red Elk, witnessed the performance comparison and confirmed that similar results occurred in mountain regions where his people had developed comparable techniques. His observations validated the cross-tribal knowledge transfer that had informed Red Elk's innovations, demonstrating that effective winter survival engineering represented accumulated wisdom rather than individual invention. The crisis resolution came with gradual temperature moderation beginning January 18th, but the performance data collected during the extreme conditions had established definitive proof of the modified tipi design's superiority. White Bear announced his intention to mandate the adoption of Red Elk's construction methods for all future winter camps, recognizing that traditional approaches had proven inadequate under the severe conditions that climate variations could bring to their region. The systematic documentation of fuel consumption, interior temperatures, structural integrity, and medical outcomes during the emergency period provided quantifiable evidence that would guide tribal shelter engineering for generations, transforming individual innovation into accepted survival technology through the validation of extreme weather testing. The spring thaw of February 1873 revealed the full scope of the winter's impact as the band conducted systematic assessments of equipment losses, medical outcomes, and resource consumption across their camp. The 4 families who had utilized Red Elk's modified construction methods reported 0 cases of cold-related injuries and no structural damage to their shelters, while the 8 families employing conventional tepee designs documented 6 instances of frostbite requiring treatment, 1 case of mild hypothermia in an adult, and complete loss of 1 shelter due to hide damage from repeated freeze-thaw cycles. Gray Wolf's formal acknowledgement came during the band's council meeting in late February, where he addressed the gathered families with the directness that characterized Lakota leadership discussions. His admission carried weight throughout the community because his initial skepticism had been vocal, and his military experience gave authority to his technical assessments. The 51-year-old warrior stated simply that Red Elk Shelter had maintained survivable conditions when his own traditional construction had failed, and that fuel efficiency differences had preserved wood supplies that would have been exhausted using conventional heating methods. Blue Bear documented the measurable advantages through his role managing camp resources, calculating that the modified teepees had consumed approximately 33% less firewood during the crisis period while maintaining interior temperatures 18 to 26 degrees warmer than conventional shelters. His mathematical analysis extended beyond simple fuel calculations to include time investment in wood gathering, which had become a critical factor when families using standard designs needed to collect and process timber at unsustainable rates during the coldest periods. The technical knowledge transfer began almost immediately as neighboring Arapaho and Cheyenne bands sent representatives to examine Red Elk's construction methods. Swift Eagle, Gray Wolf's daughter, served as a demonstration instructor for visiting tribal members, teaching the precise spacing measurements for inner lining installation and the optimal angles for lodge pole positioning that maximize the dead air cavity's insulating properties. Her teaching included practical details about rawhide lacing techniques that maintained proper tension in the suspended hide system while allowing for thermal expansion and contraction. Running Bear facilitated the cross-tribal knowledge exchange by providing historical context for the inner lining techniques his Blackfeet people had developed in mountain environments. His explanations connected Red Elk's innovations to broader patterns of indigenous engineering adaptation, demonstrating how similar principles had evolved independently among different tribal groups facing comparable survival challenges in various geographic regions. The Blackfeet elder's validation carried significant weight because his people's reputation for winter survival excellence was widely recognized across the northern plains. The systematic adoption of modified construction techniques spread beyond the immediate band as White Bear organized instructional sessions for tribal representatives from across the region. These gatherings focused on transferring specific technical knowledge rather than general concepts, with detailed instruction in measuring 8-inch cavity spacing, calculating optimal skirt extension depths, and selecting appropriate materials for windbreak construction. The chief's endorsement transformed individual innovation into official tribal technology through formal knowledge documentation and teaching protocols. Stone Bear and Gray Horse, who had assisted with the original windbreak construction, became traveling instructors who visited other Lakota bands during the spring months to demonstrate the brush fence techniques that had proven crucial during the extreme weather conditions. Their instruction covered sapling selection criteria, anchoring depths for various soil conditions, and weaving patterns that maximized wind resistance while minimizing material requirements. The systematic knowledge transfer ensured that construction techniques would be preserved accurately rather than degrading through incomplete transmission. Anthropological documentation from later decades confirmed the widespread adoption of interior lining systems throughout Plains tribal cultures, with hide or canvas inner coverings becoming standard features in winter teepee construction across multiple tribal groups. The technical innovations that Red Elk had pioneered under desperate survival conditions evolved into accepted engineering practices that combined traditional lodge-building knowledge with enhanced thermal management principles. Morningstar's expertise in hide preparation and suspension techniques became particularly valuable as demand grew for instruction in inner lining construction. Her teaching emphasized the importance of fur orientation, proper spacing from outer walls, and attachment methods that maintained structural integrity while allowing for the thermal expansion differences that occurred between interior and exterior surfaces during extreme temperature variations. The precision of her instruction ensured that adoptees achieved the same performance benefits that had proven crucial during the crisis winter. The long-term validation of Red Elk's approach extended beyond immediate tribal adoption to influence broader indigenous shelter engineering across the Northern Plains region. Modern survival instruction manuals document similar dead-air insulation principles as fundamental techniques for winter shelter construction, confirming that the thermal management concepts Red Elk had applied represented sophisticated understanding of heat transfer physics rather than accidental innovation. White Bear's mandate that all future winter camps incorporate the modified construction techniques established a permanent change in tribal shelter technology, transforming survival engineering practices that had remained static for generations. The chief's decision reflected practical leadership that prioritized proven effectiveness over traditional precedent, acknowledging that environmental conditions could exceed the capabilities of conventional approaches and require adaptive innovation. The legacy extended beyond technical construction details to encompass broader principles of observation-based adaptation and willingness to challenge accepted methods when survival conditions demanded superior performance. Red Elk's systematic approach to identifying thermal inefficiencies and developing targeted solutions became a model for indigenous innovation that balanced respect for traditional knowledge with practical necessity for continuous improvement in survival technology. Observation, adaptation, and willingness to implement what others dismissed as excessive preparation, when guided by careful analysis of natural patterns, had transformed individual innovation into permanent tribal knowledge that would serve future generations facing similar environmental challenges.